Hello children, welcome to the video. Hope everyone are doing good at home. So, at today's video we are going to see about the lesson The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle. So, Arthur Conan Doyle was born on 22nd May 1859 and died on 7 July 1930. He was a Scottish physician and writer who is most noted for his fictional stories about the detective Sherlock Holmes. The following extract is adapted from Sherlock Holmes' Mystery by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The detective's famous approach that uses logic and deduction comes into play when he tries to solve the crime. Now let us see the introduction part of the lesson. I called on my friend Sherlock Holmes on the second morning after Christmas. He was sitting on the sofa in a brown dressing gown, holding a pipe with a pile of crumpled morning papers at hand. Beside the couch was a wooden chair. On the back of the chair hung a dirty, worn, hard felt hat. A lens and forceps lay upon the seat of the chair. Forceps, tweezers. Obviously Holmes had hung the hat over his chair in order to examine it. Perhaps I interrupt you, I said. Not at all. I am glad to have a friend with whom I can discuss my results, said Sherlock. The matter is an ordinary one, he continued, but there are some points of interest in it. I seated myself in his armchair and warmed my hands before his crackling fire. Although it looks very ordinary, a deadly story or crime must be linked to it, I guessed. I guessed in the sense, Watson. No crimes, laughed Sherlock Holmes. Let me tell you how the hat came here. It was 4 o'clock on Christmas morning and Peterson, the commissioner, was walking home. What is commissioner? A uniformed door attendant. A tallish man carrying a fat goose was walking ahead of him on the road. As he reached the end of the street, a little knot of rough men attacked the man with the goose. What is knot? A group of people standing close to one another. So here a group of people standing one another to attack the man with a goose. One of the hoodlums knocked off the tall man's hat. As he aimed a blow at him, the tall man raised his stick, defended himself, and swinging it over his head, smashed the shop window behind him. Peterson rushed forward to protect the victim, but the man, frightened by Peterson's uniform, took to his heels. He took a ran. The roughs also ran away as Peterson approached. So, since Peterson was in uniform, the man with the hat as well as the knot, they took a run. So, Peterson was left with the fat goose and the battered hat that the tall man left behind. Peterson wanted to give the goose back to the owner but faced quite a problem. Mrs. Henry Baker was printed on a small card that was tied to the goose's left leg. Also, the hat does have the initials HB that have been inscribed on its lining. However, there are thousands of bakers in this city and many hundreds of those are Henry Bakers. Peterson brought both hat and goose round to me on Christmas morning as he knows such problems interest me. The goose we kept until this morning. When it seemed to be going bad, Peterson will have it cooked today. I thought that I would keep the hat with me. Did you advertise in the paper so that the owner can claim the hat? No. Who's telling no is Mr. Holmes is telling no to the advertisement. Then how will you know who the owner is? We know what we can deduce from this hat. But you are joking. I don't see what you can deduce from this battered hat. So this have been told by Watson to Mr. Holmes. Here is my lens. You know my methods. What you can gather about the man who owns this hat. I took the tattered object in my hands and turned it over rather ruefully. It was an ordinary black hat of the usual round shape, hard and much of the worse for wear. The lining had been of red silk but was a good deal discolored. There was no maker's name, but as Holmes had remarked, the initials HB were scrawled upon the side. It was pierced in the brim of the hat securer, but the elastic was missing. For the rest, it was cracked, exceedingly dusty, and spotted in several places, although there seemed to have been some attempt to hide the discolored patches by smearing them with ink. I can see nothing. Tell me what you have deduced from this hat. Like that, Watson is asking his friend. Holmes looked thoughtfully at the hat and said, "The man leads a sedentary life." What is sedentary life? Inactive in his life, and is quite clever. He is middle-aged and is not in good physical condition. His hair is grey and he puts lime cream in it. He was rich but is now no longer so. Holmes had a few other such details about the man. I was astounded. I must be very stupid, Holmes, for I am quite unable to follow you. For example, how did you deduce that he is clever from his hat? Well, the hat is very large, so he must have some brain. How do you know he has grey hairs and uses lime cream? Asked Watson. There is some fine grey hair on the lining of the hat, therefore his hair must be grey. There is a fine whiff of lime cream from the hat, so he must use lime cream. Holmes had a logical explanation for each of his deductions. While Sherlock Holmes and I were talking, Peterson rushed into the room. He showed us a beautiful blue diamond that his wife had found in the goose. Sherlock Holmes immediately recognized it as the beautiful gem that had recently been in the news. Holmes recalled reading about the theft. It had been stolen from Countess of Morcar while she was staying at the Hotel Cosmopolitan. A plumber who had come in to set something right in the room had been accused of the theft. Ryder, an attendant at the hotel, had given evidence that he had shown the plumber in shortly before the stone went missing. The Countess was very fond of the gem and was offering £1,000 as a reward for its recovery. You see, Watson, our little deduction have suddenly assumed a much more important and less innocent aspect, said Holmes thoughtfully. The question for us to solve now is the sequence of events leading from the rifled jewel case at one end to the crop of a goose in Tottenham Court Road at the other. The first step Holmes took was to place the following advertisement in the papers found at the corner of Good Street: a goose and a black felt hat. Mr. Henry Baker can have same by applying at 6:30 this evening at 221B Baker Street. This brought Baker to Holmes after a little conversation. It became quite clear to us that he was innocent. So Holmes have give him fine goose to replace the one he lost and sent him off, very happy and contented. The next step was to trace the seller of the goose. Some questioning of Mr. Baker led us to the seller, Mr. Breckenridge. So who's the seller? Mr. Breckenridge was the seller. The innocent man was Mr. Baker. In the beginning of the story, we found a tallish man, isn't it? So Baker is known as the tallish man. A little conversation with him and we found Mr. Baker's goose for Christmas had come from a lady called Mrs. Oakshott from Brixton Road. So it is known that Mr. Baker bought the goose for Christmas from a lady called Mrs. Oakshott. She is from Brixton Road. As Holmes and I were making plans to contact Mrs. Oakshott, we heard a hubbub near the Mr. Breckenridge. The goose seller was shaking his fist at a little rat-faced man who was whining that the goose was his. "Ha, this may save us a visit to Brixton Road," whispered Holmes, and went after the man. The man, it turned out, was Ryder, the hotel attendant. He was Mrs. Oakshott's brother. So the hotel attendant, Mr. Ryder, was Oakshott's brother. She bred geese for the table for her living and had promised Ryder a fine goose for Christmas. Ryder, who had given evidence against the plumber, was one who had stolen the gem. He went to see his sister with the gem in his pocket. He put it into the mouth of the goose. He thought that his sister had reserved for him. But unluckily, what happened? To avoid being caught from red-handed, he did that. But unluckily, he got a wrong goose, and the goose had the gem got sold to Mr. Baker through Mr. Breckenridge. In despair, Ryder tried to recover the goose from Mr. Baker by having him waylaid by hoodlums, but as it happened, neither did Ryder get the goose nor did he recover the gem, because Mr. Peterson came by, frightened the roughs away, and brought the goose to Holmes. Let's have a small recap. It was 4 o'clock on Christmas morning. Peterson was walking home. A tallish man carrying a fat goose was attacked by rough men. The man also tried to defend himself. Peterson rushed forward to protect the victim, but the man as well as the roughs frightened and ran away. Peterson wanted to return back the goose and the hat, but it was mentioned Mrs. Henry Baker on small card which is tied to the goose's left leg. Also hat have the initials HB in its lining. However, there are thousands of bakers in the city. He took and gave these to Mr. Holmes because he knew that these things interest Mr. Holmes. Holmes detected that the hat belonging to the person who is less active, middle-aged, puts lime cream, rich, but is now no longer so, and also gives logical explanation for each of his deductions. Peterson came with a beautiful blue diamond that his wife had found in the goose. Sherlock Holmes immediately recognized about the gem that it belongs to Countess of Morcar, and she missed it while staying at the Hotel Cosmopolitan. A plumber had been accused for the theft. The first step was Holmes took the following hat and goose to advertisement in the paper. Mr. Baker, the tallish man whom we saw at the beginning of the story, was the real owner of the goose, and he was so innocent he owned the goose from Mrs. Oakshott on Christmas morning. He was replaced with a new goose as the recovery. While Holmes and I in the sense Watson, making plans, we could heard some hubbub sound. The goose seller, Mr. Breckenridge, was shaking his fist at a little rat-faced man. He was whining that the goose was his. This was noticed by Mr. Holmes. The rat-faced man was Mr. Ryder, who was the hotel attendant who had been the evidence for the theft. The gem had been stolen by Ryder, and he went to see his sister with the gem in his pocket. Ryder put the diamond into the mouth of the goose and thought that his sister had reserved for